Every time Bitcoin enters a crisis, the same question comes back. Is this finally the end? That question has been asked for over a decade now, through every single market crash and every negative headline. And the fear is real. It feels personal. It suggests that the whole thing is fragile. But what if we've been looking at survival all wrong? This isn't about price, it's about persistence. We're going to investigate the architecture of Bitcoin's resilience by looking at the toughest tests it has ever faced. So how do we actually get from that feeling of fear to a place of understanding? Well, we're going to follow a clear path through Bitcoin's biggest trials. We'll start by redefining what a crisis even means for a system like this. Then we'll journey all the way back to its most fragile beginnings. We'll investigate the human failures that almost brought it all down, the global powers that tried to ban it, and the deep technical threats that, well, they still linger. By the end, you'll have a completely new framework for understanding what it really means to survive. Okay, so first things first, we have to address the actual source of the anxiety. When we see the value of something fall off a cliff, our gut instinct tells us the system itself must be breaking, and this is a fundamental and very human psychological mistake. And here's the core conflict. On one hand, you have the price. It's driven by emotion, by news cycles, by speculation. It's really just a measure of what people are willing to pay at any given moment. On the other hand, you have the protocol's health. This is measured by objective data. Is the network being used? Are transactions secure? Are blocks being produced? You see, these are two completely separate worlds. The panic comes when we confuse them. The protocol can be working absolutely perfectly, even when the price is in a free fall. So let's rewind all the way back to its most fragile period, the very beginning. Because before all the big market crashes and regulatory threats, Bitcoin had to face a much more fundamental challenge. It had to survive when almost nobody believed it could, or even should, exist. Just try to imagine the environment it was born into. There were no big investors, no ETFs, no established companies. There was no legal framework whatsoever, and certainly no consumer protection if things went wrong. To the rest of the world, it was just an oddity, a piece of code that most experts just wrote off as a Ponzi scheme or some digital toy that was doomed to fail. Its entire survival depended on a tiny group of users and developers who saw value in the system itself, even when there was no market price to tell them they were right. And this quote, this just perfectly captures the feeling at the time. Back in 2011, after its very first speculative bubble popped, crashing the price from $30 all the way down to $2, the consensus was clear. Wired magazine, a huge voice in tech, published this deep dive, and the tone was final. The experiment was over. And yet, the network kept running. Blocks were still produced. Transactions were still settled. The system, you see, didn't know it was supposed to be dead. And that brings us to the next major test. What happens when the companies, the human-run companies, built on top of the protocol, fail? This is such a critical distinction, but it's one that often gets lost in moments of crisis, and it leads to a lot of misplaced blame and fear. To understand the sheer scale of this test, you have to know about Mt. Gox. In early 2014, it wasn't just an exchange. For all intents and purposes, it was the Bitcoin market. It handled up to 70%, some people say even 80%, of all trading volume in the world. For most people, Mt. Gox was Bitcoin. So when it collapsed, it felt like the entire system had just imploded. Now, in the chaos of its failure, Mt. Gox publicly blamed a supposed flaw in the Bitcoin protocol itself. They called it transaction malleability. They claimed that hackers were able to change transaction IDs before they got confirmed, which tricked their internal systems into sending out funds multiple times. This created a really powerful story that the underlying code itself was broken and insecure. But when investigators finally got a look under the hood, the story changed completely. Transaction malleability was a real thing, yeah, but it wasn't the cause of the collapse. The failure was profoundly human. It was years of security breaches, a total lack of basic controls, and just catastrophic mismanagement. The protocol became a convenient scapegoat for the implosion of a single, terribly run company. And this is the crucial point. The Bitcoin protocol is a decentralized network. It has no CEO, no headquarters, no single point of failure. It has maintained near-perfect uptime through the Mt. Gox crisis, the FTX crisis, and every other company collapse you can name. Centralized exchanges, on the other hand, are just companies. They're run by people, and they're vulnerable to all the classic failures of human institutions: simple error, outright fraud, and mismanagement. The protocol survives because it's designed to operate without a trusted center. The companies built on it often fail for the exact opposite reason. The threats don't just come from inside the ecosystem. What happens when a global superpower decides it wants to shut Bitcoin down? This is the sovereignty challenge. In 2021, we witnessed the most significant state-level attack in Bitcoin's entire history. For years, China had been the undisputed center of global Bitcoin mining, mainly because of its cheap electricity. But then, the government implemented a complete and total ban, forcing every single mining operation to shut down effective immediately. The effect was immediate, and it was severe. The network's hash rate, that's the total computational power securing it, was cut in half almost overnight. To many, it looked like a fatal blow. But then something truly remarkable happened. The miners, they didn't just vanish. They relocated. They moved their operations to North America, to Kazakhstan, all over the world. And within about a year, the hash rate had made a full recovery, and then it surged to brand new all-time highs. So the ultimate result of this direct state-level attack wasn't the network's death. Instead, it acted as a catalyst. It forced the physical infrastructure of the network to become more geographically distributed, and because of that, more resilient to the actions of any single nation. The attack, paradoxically, made the entire system stronger. Okay, so Bitcoin has proven it can be resilient against human failures and even state-level attacks. But this leads to a deeper question. What about the technology itself? What if there's a fundamental flaw in the code? Or what if some future technology could make its security completely obsolete? These are the existential technical threats. The most famous of these long-term fears is, of course, quantum computing. It's a question you hear all the time, and it's a serious one. Could a powerful enough quantum computer actually break the cryptography that secures every single Bitcoin? Let's quickly look at the main technical threats. A so-called 51% attack, where one person tries to control the network, is defended by pure economics. It would just cost an unbelievable amount of money for the hardware and the power. Other kinds of attacks are defended by that same principle. Proof of work makes it incredibly expensive to cheat. Now, as for the quantum threat, the fear is that a future supercomputer could break Bitcoin's encryption. And while that technology is probably decades away, a defensive upgrade, it's called post-quantum cryptography, is already being developed. And this is really the key insight here. Bitcoin is not some static piece of code that was carved in stone. It's a dynamic system, and it's capable of evolution. It has what's called crypto agility. We've seen this before with huge upgrades like segregated witness and Taproot. These were incredibly complex changes that were successfully implemented while the network kept running without a hitch. So the threat of quantum computing isn't treated like some unavoidable doomsday. It's seen as a future engineering challenge that the community has plenty of time to prepare for and to solve. All right, having looked at all of these shocks, both internal and external, we can now start to put it all together. And this brings us to our final section, where we can build a much more robust framework for what it truly means for Bitcoin to survive. 474. Since 2010, there have been 474 recorded obituaries for Bitcoin. That means 474 times a notable person or a major media site has publicly claimed that Bitcoin is worthless or is about to be. That number alone tells a pretty powerful story about a narrative that just refuses to become reality. But what's really fascinating is when these obituaries were written. The peak was in 2017 with 124 declarations of its death, but that wasn't during a collapse. It was during a massive price surge to a new all-time high. Skepticism actually peaked with euphoria. Over time, that narrative has gotten weaker and weaker. By 2023, the number fell to just 7, which was a 10-year low. It seems the world is slowly learning that price volatility is not the same thing as debt. This leads us to a concept that just perfectly describes Bitcoin's survival mechanism: anti-fragility. It was popularized by the writer Nassim Taleb, and it's a simple but really profound idea. Some things don't just withstand shocks, they actually gain strength from them. Every failed attack, every government ban, every internal crisis has served to harden the protocol and increase global confidence in its resilience. The system learns, it adapts, and it emerges from every single test in a stronger state. So, what does survival actually mean? It does not mean a stable price. It means the network keeps running. It means maintaining nearly 99.99% uptime since the day it was created. It means that every 10 minutes, a new block of transactions is securely validated and added to the ledger, without fail. And it means that in response to attacks, the system becomes more decentralized, more robust, and more resilient. That is the true measure of its health. That feeling of fear during a crisis, it will probably always be there. It's just a natural human reaction to volatility and uncertainty. But Bitcoin doesn't survive because that fear disappears. It survives because fear never changes, but the system keeps running. This explainer is for education and historical understanding only. It is not financial advice.